Greetings builders, welcome back to another best build selection. This is the video where I bring 3 selected builds from a specific topic. Today's theme is nothing less than this amazing skill that you can only love it or hate it. There's no midterm here. I'm of course talking about Flicker Strike. The first Flicker build is my personal favorite, the Nightblade Flicker Strike Raider with the Ranger class. This is the kind of build where you can have it all. It easily achieves over 10 million DPS, it's super tanky, and as you can see on the gameplay, ultra fast. To list the pros of this build, I'll have to pretty much repeat what I just said. This is one of the most well balanced builds I've ever played. It has super speed, damage and survivability. It also has a satisfying gameplay with explosions, and let's face it, Flicker Strike is just super cool. Now to list the cons, I'd start saying that this build isn't cheap. You need some mandatory, unique and rare items that will exceed the price of one Divine Orb. Another issue is that you have little control over your character. This might be a problem on bosses like Queen Atziri and the Shaper, where you need to know which clone to attack and mind your position. Getting to the budget, this build is expensive and not a starter. You need at least 6 Divine Orbs to put it all together. Don't forget that on PoEbuilds.net you can find a list with all the equipment you need to buy for this build, with direct links with examples being sold from other players. You need 3 mandatory unique items for this build. The first is the Fahul's Fur body armor, which guarantees that you always have your full frenzy charges up. Next, we also need a Yoke of Suffering amulet that causes all of our elemental damage to be able to shock enemies, causing them to take even more damage from every source. Finally, we need the Perseverance belt that turns tankness into damage. It does that, granting 1% increased damage for every 200 of the lowest between armor and evasion. Good thing that this build counts with over 30,000 of each. For clear speed, this build is surely a 10 out of 10, and I didn't even need to tell you that. Check out this gameplay, this is some serious anime swordsman stuff. The boss damage is also great, especially when you can use your Berserker skill. As you can see, it kills guardians in less than 2 seconds, but I will only give it 9 out of 10 because this damage is reduced on pinnacle bosses when it's harder to stack our rage. For the survivability, I will also give it 9 out of 10. This build has almost 200,000 effective HP, because of high armor, high evasion, 100% spell suppression, over 30% chance to block, and high chance to avoid elemental ailments. I just took one point out because it has low life regeneration, making it vulnerable to poison. The next one is Purifier that can also freeze and shock enemies, the incredible Infernal Flicker Strike Ascendant with the Scion class. This build uses the unique sword Auto Sacrifice to sustain the frenzy charges needed for you to keep flickering, but that's not any Auto's Flicker build. This one also chills and shocks your enemies for a lot more damage, clear speed and survivability. To list the pros of this build, I would start of course with its clear speed. Flicker is just incredibly fast and super cool to play. This build also counts with an amazing boss damage and high survivability. Now to list the cons, the first thing that comes to mind is that you are always very close to enemies, which puts you in a vulnerable position. Another issue is that you have little control over your character, making it hard on bosses where you need to mind your position or attack the right enemy. As for budget, you can get it destroying early endgame maps with only around 90 chaos. To comfortably advance to yellow maps, I recommend investing around 120 chaos, and for easily completing your Atlas, I recommend investing around 4 divines. You need 3 mandatory unique items for this build. The first and most important is the Auto Sacrifice, that allows you to maintain your frenzy charges always up even while flickering. Next, we also need the Call of the Void ring that causes your attacks to chill and shatter enemies. This ring might be a little expensive during the first days of a new league, but don't worry, you'll be fine without it while waiting for the prices to drop. Finally, we also need a Yoke of Suffering amulet that causes all of your damage to shock, causing enemies to take a lot more damage. For clear speed, this build is surely a 10 out of 10. As any other Flicker Strike, this build is also insanely fast, so fast that some players can't even play it without getting nauseous. The boss damage is great and deserves 9 out of 10. This build achieves high amounts of DPS capable of decimating even the biggest bosses in just a few seconds. Now for the survivability, I'll only give 8 out of 10, just the same as the Cyclone Slayer on the previous video. Even though this build has over 120,000 effective HP because of high armor, evasion and spell suppression, I had to take 2 points out because you're always very close to enemies, which puts you in a vulnerable position. Finally, we have the classic and destructive Flicker Strike Slayer with the Duelist class. This build uses Terminal's S to sustain the frenzy charges needed for you to keep flickering. It's a great and simple Flicker Strike build for beginners. To list the pros of this build, I will have to say the same things that I already said about other Flicker builds. It's insanely fast, super cool, have an awesome boss damage, and now it also has instant life leech for more survivability. Now to list the cons, I have to say that you are always very close to enemies, which puts you in a vulnerable position. Another issue is that you have little control over your character, making it hard on bosses where you need to mind your position or attack the right enemy. As for budget, you can get it destroying early endgame maps with only around 90 chaos. To comfortably advance to yellow maps, I recommend investing around 120 chaos, and for easily completing your Atlas, I recommend investing around 4 divines. You only need one mandatory unique item for this build, and it is of course the Terminal's S sword that keeps your frenzy charges always up even while flickering. For clear speed, this build is surely a 10 out of 10. And I don't need to say anything else, just take a look at the gameplay and you have to agree with me. The boss damage is great and deserves 9 out of 10. This build easily can deal many millions of damage per second, it's just great to kill bosses like that. Now for the survivability, I'll only give 8 out of 10. Even though this build still has over 100,000 effective HP because of high armor, evasion and spell suppression, I had to take 2 points out for the same reason I did with the Cyclone Slayer and the Infernal Flicker Strike. Since you're always very close to enemies, you're always in a vulnerable position. And that's it guys! And what about you? Do you love or hate Flicker builds? Please take a second to tell me in the comments and leave a thumbs up to support the channel. I wish you guys an amazing day and don't forget to keep building.